Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Honkai Impact 3rd animation analysis. It's been about a month since I've done one of these, and I feel bad about that. I also feel bad that this is a fairly short one. This one will be Reawakening, as I'm sure you've found out by now. And it's only about a 2-minute long piece, but that's kind of good for me today because I am exhausted and I want to get one done. And this was like perfect. I was kind of worried I was going to be slogging through it, but I think we can find some things to talk about. So without further ado, let's get to the reaction part of this, shall we? Let's go. The bubbles. I also don't know if anything I'm watching at this point is like technically in order anymore. I'm just hoping it is. I lost the last playlist I was using, so I'm using a different one, and I hope that they're all close to the same. I don't even know how I lost the playlist. Saw an impact. I see a lots of effects animation already. Like, it's definitely not their first use of effects animation ever, but they're putting as much as they can into this, aren't they? Alright, even in this short piece, they're really flexing, aren't they? Oh, she's crazy like that. Okay. Jeez, the volumetrics in that. Wow, okay, so two things. One, I don't know why I had the other microphone up by my face. I think I just put it there by habit, but this is the microphone being used right now. I don't know why I did that. Second of all, I was like, oh, I'm not going to have too much to talk about. It's going to be a short piece. There's not really going to be all that much to discuss. They put so much effort into this that I am going to have to talk about quite a few little technical things. It still won't run as long as my usual, just by sheer volume. There's less to talk about, but there are still a lot of nice little details that I want to get to. So let's do that. So already right here, we have a beautiful camera follow through with this character falling down here in this roll. It's not really anything so much with the physicality of the character model themselves rolling through. It's just the follow through with the camera. They tracked it extremely well, and I just wanted to highlight it as a result. There's a great expression on her face. The roll feels heavy and natural as well, but those are all kind of standard things. It's more of just how well they married the camera to the character's expression throughout, even though she was going through a pretty rough fall there. So I think that that was just worth mentioning. Up next is another great example of the dolly zoom, or the vertigo effect, for those who may know it by that name. This is basically where the camera and the character are pushing and pulling away at the same rate, so it creates this effect that the background is getting closer or further away, while the character in the foreground stays in their general position on the camera frame. And this is just used in this case to highlight this character flying straight at the camera at an extremely fast pace. It just adds an extra punch to that movement. And of course, symbolizing with the dolly zoom, usually the point is to symbolize something like an unnerving scenario or a confusing one. So having something approach at super speed like this and utilizing the camera for that is a great way to bring all the action straight to the front of the camera instead of making it feel too far apart. It's just another great example of that effect. I know we talked about it in detail in one of my prior videos, so if I can find that one, I'll link it here in the top corner if you want to watch that and get some more detail on it. But effectively, that's it. This is actually a subtle subtle detail that probably most people might not have even noticed, but is something that the brain expects. And again, with the Honkai animations, they love to put in that little bit of extra detail to make something feel a little bit more natural. And in this case, with these explosions, you'll notice that as the explosions are happening, there's obviously these huge sweeps of this purple energy coming out. It happens again when the secondary explosion goes off after it. But what's really cool is this dip in the color here, because that is something that would be happening in the camera's exposure if you had a camera with like an automatic exposure set. Watching an explosion like this, the camera's exposure would try to dip to compensate for that extra light in the frame. And the fact that they added that is really cool. I'm not fully sure if that's because of the wave coming through the camera and it's supposed to like show an electrical interference of some sort. But given the timing of it happening alongside this explosion here, I'm assuming that it's due to that sudden change in the exposure. And that is an insanely minute detail that a lot of people tend to miss out on in animation. They just don't include it because they either don't think about it or they think it's not worth it. But that little detail can add so much intensity to the shot by having that much more energy on screen affected by what's ever happening on the screen. So I think that's a great example of those little details that this team loves to include, and it looks beautiful as a result, just having everything dip down a little bit to give that much more visual distinction to the exact focus of the shot here. I'm not going to be talking about every impact frame like I've said before, but I like to talk about the ones that are really pretty to me. So I like this one a lot. It's got the what I like to call the kill stars, the trigger stars. These are always really fun to see just because they're such a hallmark of the impact frame language at this point. I love the way that they make it look like waves being affected. You get that alternating color as per usual with impact frames. You get that white black distinction between the two of them that just flips between as needed, usually every other frame. And I really like that it makes it kind of wash away like this, just to go to basically completely white by the end. That's a really cool way to show that degradation, and is, while common in effects like this, I just really like how this one was approached. I wouldn't even begin to talk about all this fire here. This is just some insane effects animation. I'm not going to get into this because I'm not that good at fire, but I do think it looks really pretty. This is the first expression of this project that really got me going here. You can watch her pupils here dilate inwards as this happens, and especially focus on the ridge of her nose here. You can definitely see that brow scrunch, and the fact that they put in that much detail to a simple brow scrunch. You see all those extra lines appearing. You get to really see that ridge in the center. Like right here is definitely the focal point for me. Every single time I see that smooth squish happening when somebody gets a little bit angry in an animation, and if they put in that effort to make it happen, it just looks so good. You really get to see the full extreme of that. You get all these other lines in here, of course, too, like the extra lines under the eyes, the bags. You get that extra stress in the face, and having all those lines does in fact help with that. But I especially like the nose bridge, getting all that attention with the brow coming down, really centering all that mass down on the center of the nose. It's rare, honestly, to see somebody put in that much effort to a simple nose bridge, but I love that they ended up rigging that to be able to do that instead of just making it happen by having their brows go down. That sells an emotion so much, and yet again, another one of those small details that this team loves to include, and I love that they include it. There's also some pretty visually appealing water sim here. Like the city in the background is very well colored as well, but this water sim in the front, all of this ocean here, is probably not all that big of an asset. If I had to assume, they probably just had a small little pool that was actually being rendered instead of like a whole ocean. That would just be very inefficient. So if I were to like do this from a top-down perspective and imagine that, like, I'm gonna take off the timer here, but imagine that if we're looking at this from a top-down perspective, and that this is the camera here, right? So you're seeing this, and this water is basically right here, probably in its own little pouch, like a little pocket, a little square, and we're seeing just this while the city is like back here. You got that bridge coming through and like whatever else. Do you see what I mean? No, I assume that what's happening here is literally just that water in that front, just to save some resources, because filling all of this with water, or at very least this part and this part with water, would just be absurd. Basically, I'm just assuming there. I'm not entirely sure. For all I know, that water pool that I'm talking about is much bigger than I'm anticipating it to be. But in the concept and the mindset of saving resources during a render, more resources means more time for an export. So you want to use as little as you can, and it would make sense to have just a little pocket of water in the front so you can just handle all that instead of having the entire ocean rendered all at once. I know we see more water later, so it's possible that they were just reusing that asset and scooching it a little further into the camera to like our perspective so we see more of it. But it's hard to believe that they would render all of that for like multiple shots, especially when you don't see the rest of it. That's the big brain stuff you have to think about when you're rendering in CG. If the audience can't see it, don't render it. It is a complete waste of time and resources. Make sure that whatever the camera is locked into, get everything that's off the screen out of the project. It saves a lot of time in renders, especially for people doing indie stuff. A team like this would probably have an entire render farm of GPUs working at 100% to render everything they can, similar to a Hollywood studio, but it's just not realistic for the smaller people out there, the independents. So if you're ever working in a CG field and you want to save some time, look at your shot, see where the camera's locked off, and get rid of anything that's not there. In video games, they do it all the time. It's called culling. And while you can do that in live render stuff like video games a little bit more efficiently, you can set certain parameters to avoid certain things being loaded in at certain times. You can do the same thing with animation by basically deleting models that just aren't on screen. So keep that in mind if you're ever getting into it or you just haven't thought about that and your renders are taking forever. Get rid of the crap that you don't need. It will save your life. Trust me. There is a lot happening in this sequence. I really don't know if I have the time to talk about as many things as I want to on this one, purely because there are so many minute details. So I'm just letting it play through. But in general, beautiful effects animation there. A lot of great things with the rain, the fire, the explosion, all of those like air cones to like help show the travel of the wind. It's just all working so well together, so well handled. This shot must have been handled by like the A team because of all those details being thrown in here. Even in this frame I accidentally paused on, it looks gorgeous. You can see all of these ripples in here while I'm here talking about this. All this volumetric ripple noise. This is something that I feel like they probably rendered this water in this case with a volumetric shader like a cloud simulator rather than a water simulator because of the way that it looks when put underneath these harsh conditions of light. Usually when water is lit up, it doesn't look quite so fluffy like this. This kind of looks more like mashed potatoes or ice cream really close up. So I think that they use volumetric clouds in order to do this and make it look like a bigger water. This is a thing that has been done for years and years and years. They used to do it in Hollywood. They still do sometimes. It really just depends on what they can do because water and all those little tiny individual masses are extremely complex to render out. So generalizing things into like a cloud of vapor, quote unquote, makes much more sense for the system. It's a lot more efficient. So that's something else you can do to like speed up your renders if you're ever wondering. Try using cloud simulators and smoke simulators instead of water simulators that take up so much more resources. There are modern advancements to that make water a little bit easier to render, but it's still more complex and advanced for the math to be mathed out. You know, it's a lot of calculations for a computer to do. So doing something a little bit more bulky and more rounded like a cloud sim is much more efficient. So I'm pretty sure that's what they're doing here. And right here we got that I'm sorry. I do really love the shading on this though. Her face, her expression looks extremely lively, albeit absolutely crazy. And the eyes are so bright, and the fact that they brightened them up even further than like even the blue, like that red is so piercing in all of this cool tone around here. So that's just a really good color theory thing. I think this shot looks gorgeous purely by staring her down and just looking straight in her eyes. It's kind of insane, you know, like in both a good and a bad way. She crazy, but you can really see that, and it sells extremely well. and it helps even more that she is dead center of the frame, so you really don't have a visual reason to look away or at anything else on screen, so that really sells that lock that your mind is doing. So I think that's really, really cool, just from a directorial standpoint. And right here, this explosion is really cool too, because they affect the camera with it, and they do this blur, which is just a good idea. You have a lot of motion coming at the camera. You're trying to obscure the visual to show a little bit more of that confusion in the shot here with the explosion happening. You can still see what's happening, but all of the water coming up and getting in the way helps hide that transition between the explosion happening and the end of the shot getting cut away from it. So it just helps direct the visual language of that shot a little bit more, especially since there's all of these little fragmented hunks of like bubbles and groupings of water that you're seeing on top of the character you're trying to focus on. And here's that other beautiful shot. This is a trailer worthy shot. This is a monumental background level shot. This is a computer background, and I love it when they do these. This is a lot more of what I was talking about with those cloud volumetric things. Obviously, this used in a much more obvious way by being clouds, but you can see how on all of this shot here, all of these reds are reflecting off the edge of these clouds. You're seeing a lot of these harsh, really bright, hard edges on the edge of the clouds. And that's kind of what I meant with the underwater one, is that's how volumetric rendering ends up claiming its victims, so to speak. It really does have more of an aggressive, bright edge, because that's the way that water vapor or cloud smoke, etc., would be gathering that light and grabbing onto it, and then getting a little bit more soft as you get further out into the cloud. Basically, the denser the cloud is, the more light you get refracted back at it. So as the cloud is a little bit softer further back, you get less of that light refracted because it's already been scattered around. It's just physics. They're so important and nobody likes to talk about it, but they're extremely important to animation. And of course, the last thing we got to talk about is this beautiful expression. Yet again, another great example of their expression works in these projects. This smile is absolutely unhinged in all the best ways. So especially I want you to pay attention to the corner of her mouth as it spreads back and realize how far by the time it hits its apex, it's already there. That's all the further the mouth should go. It keeps going. It keeps going. You know, like, it continues to go. There's a separation here that is completely unnatural. This right here, this line, is not how the mouth works. And then you have this extra line all the way back here. It kind of gives the Joker effect from Batman. This sort of expression that you're like, that's close. It's an uncanny valley like neighbor, where it's just off enough that your brain knows something isn't right. And I really like how they do that. So not only do they make the mouth curve in an unnatural way at the end and kind of make this twisted grin kind of bump here at the very back, but also adding this extra line here beyond the smile just to make it look that much less realistic, which really does push that I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to be in the room right now. Not with Miss Touchy. But I think that's about it for this video, so thank you all so very much for watching. I promise it won't take me another month to get to the next video in this list, and I will do my best to break that one down as I do everything else. But it's just been a while. I've had a lot going on, and I couldn't get to them quite as fast as I would like to. I do plan at some point to do a live stream of like a number of these all at once, like a couple hours worth, just to knock through some of them and really talk about them in excess and explain things that I usually would cut out, so people can see that extra thought running through my head while I'm going through these videos, because I edit out a lot of my unhinged commentary, but I digress. Thank you all so very much for watching, and if you want to see more of these down the line, by all means, you know how to follow me and support me and all that. And if you want to see a specific thing, a specific animation from something that you like, leave it in the comments below, and if it gets enough likes, maybe I'll give it a shot next time. But otherwise, I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye!